And so once again, one of our national political parties has proved that it has zero tolerance for sexual harassment or assault. And the other party is populated entirely by members of Congress who proudly voted for this guy 3 times after he said this.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even know. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the.
And today, in a statement posted at 5:25 p.m., Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, a frequent guest on this program, said, quote, "I am deeply sorry to my family, staff, and constituents for mistakes and judgments I've made in my past. I will fight serious false allegations made against me. However, I must take responsibility and ownership for the mistakes I did make. I am aware of efforts to bring an immediate expulsion vote against me and other members. Expelling anyone from Congress without due process within days of an allegation being made is wrong, but it's also wrong for my constituents to have me distracted from my duties. Therefore, I plan to resign my seat in Congress. I will work with my staff in the coming days to ensure they are able, in my absence, to serve the needs of the good people of the 14th Congressional District." All of Eric Swalwell's most important allies very quickly abandoned him this weekend, including former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They first urged him to stop his campaign for governor, which he did, and then they urged him to resign from Congress, which he has now done. The speed of the Democratic Party's rebuke of Eric Swalwell shamed Republican House members today, almost all of whom had remained completely silent for months now, about Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who first denied and then admitted an extramarital sexual relationship with a staff member who later took her own life. And Republicans remained silent last week when the San Antonio Express-News reported on another of the congressman's staffers, this one a former campaign aide, who said that Congressman Gonzalez asked her to send him nude photographs and have sex with him. That provoked silence from Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. And today, Republicans realized that they might have to vote to expel Republican Congressman Gonzalez if the House was going to have a vote on expelling the Democrat Eric Swalwell. And so an hour and 5 minutes after Eric Swalwell announced his resignation from Congress, Tony Gonzalez announced his resignation from Congress. And so we can be sure tonight that Republicans would have easily tolerated Tony Gonzalez among their House membership if Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic allies of Eric Swalwell had not made it politically impossible for them. But these same Republican members of the House and Senate voted for Donald Trump for president after they heard the Access Hollywood video with Donald Trump describing his favorite method of sexual assault. They heard Donald Trump describe how he sexually assaults women before even saying hello, and they voted for him. Donald Trump is the only politician caught on tape describing in his own voice sex crimes that he said he is allowed to commit, and Republican members of the House and Senate voted for him 3 times. And they still support Donald Trump. Republican members of the House and Senate, with a couple of notable exceptions from Kentucky, will accept anything Donald Trump does. They live in cowardly fear of criticism from Donald Trump. There are 56 Catholics who are Republican members of the House of Representatives. There are 11 Catholics who are Republican members of the United States Senate, and each of them lives to varying degrees in fear of Donald Trump. Each of those 67 Republican Catholics in Congress, except Senator Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, supported Donald Trump for president in the last election after he received 34 guilty verdicts for business fraud and covering up payments to a porn star to buy her silence about having sex with Donald Trump in a hotel room while Donald Trump's third wife was at home nursing her baby boy, who is now old enough for military service in Donald Trump's war. But we don't even know if the 20-year-old Barron Trump has registered for the draft as federal law required him to do 2 years ago, within 30 days of his 18th birthday, and failure to comply with that law is a felony. And for the first time in history, we don't know tonight whether the president's son, a president's son, has complied with that law about registering for the military draft. And not one Republican in Congress wants to know if Barron Trump has registered for the draft because they live in fear of Donald Trump. Those Republican Catholics in Congress remain silent, as Donald Trump has become the first president in history to repeatedly attack the Pope. Donald Trump's attacks on the Pope today included the nonsensical statement, quote, "I think he's very weak on crime." There has never been a pope in favor of crime, and Donald Trump is the first politician in American history who thinks the Pope is some kind of political candidate that he is campaigning against. Donald Trump also told the demented lie in attacking the Pope that Iran wants to, quote, "exterminate the world." Now, think of the level of depraved stupidity involved in that statement. Iran wants nuclear weapons, quote, "so they can exterminate the world," end quote. That is Donald Trump's childlike understanding of nuclear weapons that has apparently not become even slightly more informed as a result of becoming president and being in control of nuclear weapons himself. After another brush with Donald Trump's madness today, Pope Leo said this.
I have no fear of neither the Trump administration nor speaking out loudly about the message of the gospel. And that's what I believe I am called to do, what the church is called to do. We're not politicians. We're not looking at big foreign policy, as he calls it, with the same perspective that he might understand it. But I do believe that the message of the gospel, blessed are the peacemakers, is a message that the world needs to hear today.
And not one of those Republican Catholics in the House or the Senate had the courage to say today, "I agree with the Pope." Not one of them. Donald Trump's longest-serving White House Chief of Staff, former Marine Corps General John Kelly, according to a report in the New York Times today, concluded that Donald Trump was mentally ill. John Kelly reached that conclusion possibly after learning about a book on this program that we featured repeatedly on this program, co-authored by mental health professionals, called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. The Times reports today, quote, John F. Kelly, his longest-serving White House Chief of Staff in the first term, even bought a book by 27 of those specialists called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump in an effort to understand his boss, and came to the conclusion that he was mentally ill. And that is not a 6-inch headline in newspapers around the country, around the world tonight. Donald Trump was mentally ill, says Chief of Staff. Imagine if an Obama White House Chief of Staff, a Biden White House Chief of Staff, a Bush White House Chief of Staff, any White House Chief of Staff had ever said that the president and the White House they served in was mentally ill. If that was said at any point in time during or after a presidency, it would be huge news. But now it's buried inside a longer New York Times article under the headline, Trump's erratic behavior and extreme comments revive mental health debate. The article shows a photograph of Donald Trump with a couple of his favorite people, Tucker Carlson and then Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, in 2022, just having the time of their lives. And now Donald Trump says both of those dear friends are, as he puts it, low IQ. Donald Trump says, quote, they're nut jobs, troublemakers, and will say anything necessary for some free and cheap publicity. And Donald Trump says that about them because they oppose his war in Iran. Donald Trump's flip against those former friends is now counted in the New York Times today as one of the indicators of Donald Trump's, quote, erratic behavior. The Times quotes Donald Trump's threat to Iran last week, saying a whole civilization will die tonight, a threat that is in and of itself a war crime. And the Times turns to Ty Cobb, who was a White House lawyer in Donald Trump's first term, to quote him, telling Jim Acosta that Donald Trump is, quote, a man who is clearly insane. And that is from Donald Trump's former friend and lawyer. In the Times assessment of Donald Trump's apparent cognitive decline, Democratic Senate Leader Chuck Schumer is quoted calling Donald Trump an extremely sick person and unhinged. And Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin's letter to the White House physician requesting an evaluation of Donald Trump is quoted, noting signs consistent with dementia and cognitive decline and increasingly incoherent, volatile, profane, deranged, and threatening tantrums. And so in a period where much of the news media is catching up to this program's coverage of Donald Trump's mental health, which began 10 years ago here, Donald Trump added considerably to John Kelly's case that he is, in fact, mentally ill by posting this image of himself appearing as a Christ-like savior. How much dementia does it take for the President of the United States to send that false image of himself around the world? Is that what John Kelly means by mental illness? This is one of the rare Trump social media posts that he removed, actually took down, after being criticized for presenting himself as God in what amounts to blasphemy for many of Donald Trump's right-wing Christian nationalist supporters. Donald Trump then defended that image, saying that it's really an image of him as a doctor. That's what he said. That's a doctor, not an image of him as Jesus Christ. If we put that image back up, you can wonder why he didn't explain what that thing is in his left hand in the image, the magical glowing orb that none of us have ever seen in a doctor's office. But let's just take the man who John Kelly says is mentally ill at his word. Let's just pretend for a moment that the imagery there was very clear and it was actually Donald Trump as a doctor. Let's pretend it was Donald Trump in a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. How would that be any less insane? And anyone who is demanding more proof of the insanity of Donald Trump has to recognize that you're asking for more proof than his White House lawyer Ty Cobb needed to declare Donald Trump insane and to say it publicly. And you're asking for more proof than Donald Trump's longest-running White House chief of staff, John Kelly, needed to call Donald Trump mentally ill. But if you are asking for more proof that Donald Trump is insane, there is his latest military announcement about the war he started with Iran without being able to explain why he started that war. Donald Trump has announced that the United States Navy will now blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Now, recall that the day before Donald Trump's war began, the Strait of Hormuz was wide open to shipping of all kinds, and it has been during every other war in the Middle East. It was only because Donald Trump started a war against Iran that Iran decided on the strategy of closing the Strait of Hormuz. And then, in the single most foolish strategic shift in the history of American warfare, Donald Trump's immediate goal in the war he started was then opening the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before he started his war. And having failed completely to open the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump's next strategy was to say, I, Donald Trump, will close the Strait of Hormuz, will block the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump wants them to open it. They won't open it. So Donald Trump says, I will block it. Is that anything other than outright screaming insanity? CENTCOM had to correct Donald Trump's public declaration about his intention of blocking the strait to say, CENTCOM's correction was to say that the United States Navy was going to not blockade the Strait of Hormuz, but blockade or try to blockade ships entering and exit Iranian ports, if anything. Not even clear that they're going to do that. No one who voted against Donald Trump 3 times can be surprised by any of this Trump madness. He was clearly the stupidest person ever to win a major party nomination in 2016 when he became the Republican nominee for president the first time. Donald Trump reeked of stupidity then in everything he said about every one of his childlike fantasies about how government or the presidency could work, beginning with Mexico will pay for the wall. Everyone who voted against Donald Trump 3 times knew that he should never be trusted with the nuclear codes. Everyone who voted against Donald Trump 3 times knew that he could never possibly carry out the role of commander-in-chief of the American military. And so now the president, who John Kelly thought was mentally ill in his first term, has launched a war that is now defined by a madman posting images of himself as Jesus Christ while he is telling the Pope that the Pope is wrong. And we got here because Donald Trump, in his first term, when his White House chief of staff thought he was mentally ill, tore up the greatest diplomatic achievement of our lifetimes, the deal negotiated by Secretary of State John Kerry and President Obama, in which Iran agreed not to develop nuclear weapons. And this weekend, not surprisingly, Donald Trump's vice president failed to reach an agreement with Iran on anything. It would have been considered a huge victory for J.D. Vance to achieve even half of what John Kerry and our next guest, Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman, achieved in their negotiations with Iran. And where was Donald Trump during the crucial moments of this weekend's negotiations with Iran? In another sign that Donald Trump is mentally ill, he was at an ultimate fighting festival in Miami because Donald Trump doesn't even know how to fake being presidential in time of war or ever. And Donald Trump doesn't know how to fake at least appearing to be sane. We'll be right back. This morning on Morning Joe, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said this.
We had physicists, nuclear weapons practitioners at the table when our administration was negotiating for the JPOA. You need people who know something, who know the history. It's shocking that Trump said nobody told him that Iran might close the Strait of Hormuz. Every war game I was ever involved in, that was the first thing we assumed Iran would do. So we're in a situation now where we are weak, where we essentially have lost the leverage and initiative that we had. I also know from personal experience how Netanyahu has tried to get every American president to agree to have an open-ended war with Iran, because I had many, many hours-long conversations with him and his war cabinet about this, and refusing to go along with a very inchoate desire to do something to Iran that, with no real end state that could be described sufficiently. So now here we are.
Joining us now, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, who served as Deputy Secretary of State during the Iran negotiations under Secretary John Kerry. She's also one of the lead negotiators on that team in the Obama administration. Ambassador Sherman, I'm struck by so many things here that the Trump team keeps saying, and Donald Trump keeps saying this all the time, that Iran has never agreed not to produce a nuclear weapon. It's written right into the actual, I'm just going to read from the deal you negotiated.
Sure.
Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. That's what you got. And J.D. Vance so far has gotten nothing.
Well, Lawrence, we are really in a very difficult spot because, as Secretary Clinton pointed out, and she really was the secretary who began all of the real negotiating around this by bringing information that John Kerry, who was then Senator Kerry and chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and had gotten word from Oman that Iran was interested in having a bilateral secret channel, she went to President Obama, who agreed to give it a try. sent Bill Burns, Jake Sullivan, some others to meet with the Iranians. And that bilateral discussion was brought into a multilateral discussion, which I had the privilege and honor to lead, a really terrific team that included nuclear physicists and sanctions experts and lawyers and commerce experts and people from our national labs and energy experts. And ultimately, at the end of the negotiations, Secretary Kerry, who knew every single detail of this, as did President Obama, spent 19 days in the Palais Coburg in Vienna working on this deal. Ernie Moniz, our Secretary of Energy and nuclear physicist, an extraordinary physicist, spent all of that time negotiating this deal. These things take time. And I think what the Secretary was really emphasizing here is you have to have strategic patience. You have to be ready to do the hard, difficult work. And you know, we've had a split screen in these last few days. Not only this crazy war, as you pointed out, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the war closed it. And as Secretary Clinton pointed out, we have all, administration after administration has gamed this out. It's why no other president went to war, because they knew what would happen. They knew that our allies and partners in the region would get attacked. They knew the strait could be mined and closed. They knew what it would do to the global economy. When I testified with Congress, when I had secure sessions with members of Congress, I said to them, here's our choice. We negotiate a deal to make sure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, or we face the potential of an Arab-Persian war. And that's where we are now. The split screen has been those great astronauts who have talked about our great planet, one Earth, the human race, how terrific our country is, our technical capability, and an administration that can't shoot straight. Our military spectacular, tactically brilliant. Strategically, the president has been terrible. And we are now today facing a situation where we have a much more hardline government in Iran that I believe, led by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, will decide over time that it has to get a nuclear weapon to be a deterrent against future attacks. And then many other countries around the world will want to get a nuclear weapon, and we'll be in a whole lot more trouble.
So you negotiated holding Iran's enrichment limited to 3.7%. And to cap the stockpile on enriched uranium. And without the deal in place after Donald Trump ripped it up, of course, Iran was able to enrich more than that.
Indeed. It was actually 3.67%. It was a 300 kilograms, as it just was shown on the screen, of a stockpile of 3.67%. The stockpile that's buried underground after the attacks by us and Israel is probably 440 kilograms, nearly 1,000 pounds of 60% enriched uranium. 60% is very close. It's a short hop to 90%, which is what is needed for what's called fissile material, the ingredient you need to make a nuclear weapon. So we have come a long way because President Trump ripped up the deal, and no deal is perfect. That 3.67%, that small stockpile, the two things could never produce enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon, was going to last for at least 15 years. And then there were many other restrictions that continued on past that. But most importantly, the International Atomic Energy Agency had the most extensive verification and monitoring mechanism in the world. People on the ground, electronic monitoring, all kinds of bells and whistles that hadn't existed before, that got created for this deal, so we knew what was going on. And if somehow Iran managed to cheat in spite of really extensive restrictions and monitoring, we would have a year to take other action, to negotiate or to use military action. We had a credible threat of military force. President Obama deployed the massive ordnance penetrator, which President Trump ultimately used against Fordo, the underground center for enrichment. But President Obama made that possible. So Iran knew we could do what we would need to if they didn't come to a deal, if somehow they tried to get a nuclear weapon. We all agree Iran should never have a nuclear weapon, possess, create, or get a nuclear weapon.
Former Ambassador Wendy Sherman, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, Donald Trump lost another big election, this time in Hungary. That's next with Professor Timothy Snyder. Euronews reports at around 6:30 p.m. local time, the Election Commission reported a voter turnout of just over 77%, setting a new record in Hungarian election history. And 2 days before that election, Donald Trump desperately debased the presidency by trying to buy votes for Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban by posting this on social media. My administration stands ready to use the full economic might of the United States to strengthen Hungary's economy, as we have done for our great allies in the past. If Prime Minister Viktor Orban and the Hungarian people ever need it, we are excited to invest in the future prosperity that will be generated by Orban's continued leadership! And last week, Donald Trump's vice president, James David Vance, disgraced the vice presidency by campaigning with Viktor Orban, who has maintained close ties to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. On Sunday, Donald Trump's candidate went down in a crushing defeat, with the new prime minister winning on an anti-corruption campaign. Joining us now is Timothy Snyder, professor of history at the University of Toronto. He's also the author of the New York Times bestsellers On Freedom and On Tyranny. Professor Snyder, your reading of what we saw in this election.
Well, it's an election about Hungarian domestic politics. And on the one side, we have an economy which is in decline. On the other side, we have a resistance movement which is able to link economic questions, people's experience of everyday life, with the thoroughgoing grift and corruption of the Orban administration. So those two factors, a declining economic situation, plus a movement which worked hard for 2 years to connect scandals at the top with people's everyday life. That's Hungary from within. And that's why what we do as Americans, shameful though it is, didn't really matter. However, for us, at least for those of us who, like the vice president and the president, are members of an international far-right network, this election has a meaning that goes far beyond Hungary. Orban, for the better part of 2 decades, has been a central ideological and financial node of a network that supports American think tanks, American right-wing organizations, American candidates for office. Orban has been the teacher. People like Trump and Vance have been the pupils. And so in losing Orban, they suffer something quite serious. They lose the person who instructed them, who funded them, who helped them, who set an example for them. Orban's fall also shows that they can fall as well. So if you're in the center or on the left, you probably don't think much about Orban. But if you're on the American far right, you probably do. Because the American far right, ironically, is far more cosmopolitan, far more international than other parts of the American political spectrum. And Orban was the sun around which all of that dependency and international connections orbited.
What is the lesson for the resistance to Trumpism here in the United States?
That's a wonderful question. First of all, that you have to do the work over a long period of time. Election, we're covering this as a big story, and it is a big story. This is one of the biggest elections of the century. But the reason we have this big story is because the work of not just an opposition leader, Petr Magyar, but also the work of thousands of organizers over 2 years. So you have to do the work. The second lesson is you have to connect the scandals to people's everyday life. You can't just say democracy. You can't just say affordability. You have to explain to people how an authoritarian regime leads to corruption and leads you to have poor prospects for yourself and for your children. The most fundamental lesson of all this, though, is that these guys can be beaten, and they can be beaten badly. Orban was at the center, somewhere between Trump and Putin. He is the one who pioneered a system where where the elections are unfair, where it's all uphill, where the media is too tilted towards the government. He did all of that, and nevertheless, he got absolutely walloped in an unfair election. He got walloped in an election which was rigged in his direction. This is the fundamental lesson, that it can be done, that you can win, and in fact, you can win big. And I would add one more point. One thing that Petr Magyar has been very good at talking about is when we get to the other side, the folks who were corrupt, the folks who broke the law, those people are going to see justice. I think that's a point which Democrats or people around them would also be well advised to make, that we will eventually come back to a situation where there will not be crime without punishment, that if you're going to break the law now, if you're going to exploit the American people now, there may be consequences for you down the line.
Professor Timothy Snyder, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Very glad.
And coming up, Donald Trump lost again in court, this time with a federal judge dismissing his ridiculous $10 billion defamation lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, a lawsuit that even Donald Trump had to know was a hopeless joke. Donald Trump losing again in court. Our next guest beat Donald Trump in court when Donald Trump sued him when he was working at the New York Times. Tim O'Brien joins us next. Donald Trump lost another one of his absolutely ridiculous, frivolous lawsuits. A federal judge in Florida dismissed Donald Trump's lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal for breaking the story about a birthday book for Jeffrey Epstein, the sex predator and sex trafficker and rapist, that included a birthday note with Donald Trump's signature. The note said, "Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." Donald Trump's ridiculous lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal did not inhibit anyone else in the news media or the Wall Street Journal from showing the Trump page of the birthday book repeatedly. Donald Trump himself indicated in every way possible that he was not taking his own lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal seriously. The owner of the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch, was a named defendant in that lawsuit, but Donald Trump repeatedly socialized with Rupert Murdoch in very friendly circumstances after filing the lawsuit, with things like with Rupert Murdoch attending the state dinner for Donald Trump at Windsor Castle and at least 2 private dinners at the White House with Donald Trump. Earlier this year, an absurd Donald Trump lawsuit against the New York Times was also dismissed by the judge in the case. Joining us now is Tim O'Brien, senior columnist for Bloomberg Opinion and the author of Trump Nation. He was sued by Donald Trump in 2006. And Tim, please tell us the outcome of the lawsuit Donald Trump filed against you for your book about him overstating his wealth.
The court dismissed the case, Lawrence, and they dismissed it on factual grounds. They essentially the reason this case got dismissed. You know, the standard in a libel case is you have to prove actual malice by the reporters, and what that means in plain English is that somehow they ignored evidence or manufactured evidence and just didn't do the job that well-trained institutional reporters like those at the Wall Street Journal and other publications have done. And the judge in this case essentially said, you can have a do-over if you want, Trump, but if you come back again, this is the standard you're going to have to hit. So don't come and bother me again. And it's very much in keeping with the ruling he lost against the New York Times last fall on similar grounds as well. And in all of these cases, Trump is using the courts for performance art, not to actually stage a serious case, and he's using it to try to chill the press. So these rulings are important because they keep the press and the media on an even footing with the powers that be.
Yeah, and Trump is a litigation junkie, and he just wants that one-day hit. You could tell he feared the Wall Street Journal coming out with the birthday book. It was a huge story. We all were on it, and we're all waiting to see it. We're all waiting to see that page and that drawing. And when it came out, Donald Trump behaved as if this was the end of his political career. I think Donald Trump was surprised that Republicans did not break with him over that. But his lawsuit that day was his strategy, his desperate move to try to tell Republicans, don't abandon me over this. And he just needed to get through the day.
Yes, so that you shouldn't believe claims in an article that suggests that Donald Trump is a sexual predator and jokes around with his friends about women as objects and is happy to include it in a birthday book. There is ample evidence that corroborates this kind of a thing all over Donald Trump's career and presidency and life. So it is not out of character for him at all. It also came at a time when the Epstein files were political dynamite. They were incendiary and continue to be incendiary claims that's divided the MAGA base, that has been a threat to Trump's Justice Department. I think Pam Bondi got tossed out of the Trump administration because she didn't do an adequate job defending Trump from some of those claims. And this lawsuit is part and participle of that same effort. It's to bury the truth. It's to try to smear the press for asking legitimate and important questions. And it's Donald Trump trying to tell everyone in the world not to see him for who he is.
You know, I'm hoping the news media finally catches on and reports these things as fraudulent devices on the day they're filed, the way I do here. I've never taken one of them seriously for 1 minute. And when he files them on that first day, he always manages to get some serious press attention to it as if these are real lawsuits. Tim O'Brien, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Tonight's last word is dismissed, the word judges use to end all the ridiculous Trump lawsuits.